Hello everyone, welcome to this presentation on a key concept of macroeconomics, the concept of autonomous expenditure taught to undergraduate students of semester 3 BA program in economics. I am Anna Rovina Fernandez, assistant professor in economics at Carmel College for Women, Nova Goa. So let's begin. In this module, we will be covering the concept of autonomous expenditure. We will be knowing the difference between autonomous and induced expenditure, and we will also show a graphical illustration of the effect of autonomous expenditure on equilibrium GDP. At the end of the module, students will be able to explain the concept of autonomous expenditure. They will be able to clearly differentiate between autonomous and induced expenditure and clearly demonstrate the effect of changes in autonomous expenditure on equilibrium real GDP in the aggregate expenditure model. So let's begin with the question, what is autonomous expenditure? Autonomous expenditure is that part of aggregate expenditure which does not vary with the level of real GDP or income. It does not increase or decrease when income changes. The term autonomous means independent. Autonomous expenditures are not dependent on the level of GDP. Rather, it is expenditure which is determined by factors other than real income. Let's take some examples. Even if consumer income is zero, there is autonomous spending to meet basic needs such as food and clothing. In this time of pandemic, for instance, consumers have to spend, households have to spend on products like masks, sanitizers, which have become basic necessities, and whether you are rich or poor, you have to buy them irrespective of income level. Another example, with insufficient incomes, people may borrow and consume. Investors may borrow and invest. Most of the government spending on infrastructural projects, on law and order, on defense is autonomous, as such expenditures are required to run a nation. So let's look at what are the factors determining autonomous expenditures. There are several factors other than income which determine autonomous expenditure. Basic necessities, for instance. Interest rate changes is another important determinant. When the interest rates come down, investors want to borrow and invest. Another important determinant is the levels of confidence in the economy, what we call as business optimism or business pessimism. In the current scenario, when there is business pessimism prevailing, autonomous expenditures are at extremely low levels. So financial crisis or any type of health crisis like the one we are witnessing at present affects the extent of autonomous expenditures in an economy. Besides this, there are external factors like exchange rates, trade policies, innovation, and tax policies that affect autonomous expenditures. The total aggregate expenditure in an economy is comprised of two components. They are autonomous component and the induced component. Look at this equation here, which states that aggregate expenditure AE is equal to C plus I plus G plus XM, where C is household consumption, I stands for planned investment, G is government expenditure, and XM are the net exports or the difference between exports and imports during a given year. Let's take each of these components. Component C has or consumption is made up of autonomous as well as induced consumption. When consumption is not dependent on income, it is the autonomous consumption. When it is dependent on income, it is the induced component of consumption. C is equal to A plus BY, where A stands for autonomous consumption and BY is that part of consumption which is dependent on income. I, most of I, that is planned investment, is autonomous. Government spending is considered to be largely autonomous. Net exports too are mainly autonomous, although some proportion is due to national production as well. Let us look at the difference between autonomous and induced expenditures. As explained earlier, autonomous expenditures are not affected by changes in real GDP, while induced expenditures are. Autonomous expenditure is represented in this figure, if you see, by a horizontal line parallel to the x-axis. So, it implies that when GDP changes, there is no change in autonomous expenditure. In the panel B of the figure, you see a positive slope of the autonomous expenditure curve, of the aggregate expenditure curve, which indicates that these are induced expenditures. They go up when consumption goes up. The slope of this curve indicates the marginal propensity to consume, that is, to what extent consumption changes when income changes. Now, let us look at this figure, which is a graphical illustration of the effect of changes in autonomous expenditure on equilibrium GDP. The equilibrium level of income is at E. So, we begin at the equilibrium level of income E, where the real GDP is at level YO. Now, let us assume autonomous investment goes up from A1 to A2. This results in a parallel shift of the aggregate demand curve, the AD curve, from AD1 to AD2. As you can see, the AD curve has shifted upwards from AD1 to AD2. Consequently, there is a series of changes that happen in the economy as this equilibrium is disturbed. The aggregate demand goes up because when people spend, one person's expenditure is another person's income. So, there is a cycle of income, employment, investment which goes up. When producers find that their inventories are drawn down, they undertake further investment. And so, the point moves from point E to point F to point G, where the aggregate demand goes up to A3. And in this process, a new equilibrium is reached, equilibrium E1. At this point of new equilibrium, we find that there is a multiple increase in income, which is more than proportionate to the increase in autonomous expenditure. So, we infer from this that increase in autonomous spending shifts the AE curve to the right, and this shift in the AE line due to autonomous increase in expenditure leads to a much larger increase in equilibrium output. So, we sum up on this topic of autonomous expenditure by stating that it is independent of the level of income. Changes in autonomous spending changes the equilibrium level of income. The final increase in aggregate income that results from an increase in autonomous spending is a multiple of the increase in autonomous expenditure. That is all we have on this topic. Do check the glossary and the references for further reading. Thank you.